Welcome, Danielle Linder, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
Good, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks so much for coming on. Today, we're going to be talking about your work as a parenting coach. And I just love learning things about different professions, different coaches, and especially parenting, because parenting is not going to be a cookie cutter type of thing. It's not going to be a one size fit all. There's going to be unique situations, scenarios that a parent must understand and go through, especially if you have multiple children, because all of them have different personalities. So we're going to be learning all the tips and tricks today and getting into your work and how you help people. In your own words, can you tell the world who you are, what you do, and how you help?
Sure. I try and help parents with giving them a toolbox with strategies to make parenting more joyful, more peaceful, and less full of battles. And I work with primarily parents who have children 18 months through, let's say, first grade, second grade, mostly early childhood educator. So that's my wheelhouse. And I started a preschool 14 years ago. I've worked with hundreds of children and hundreds of parents, and every child's different, every parent's different. I just felt like a lot of parents feel like they're alone out there, that asking for help means that they failed. And it's so the contrary. Asking for help means that you want to do the best by your child and your family. And often having another opinion that's not invested in your family per se, like your mother-in-law, your father-in-law, your father, your mother, your brothers or sisters, where they have some stake in it, you often will get more of an honest opinion and hopefully get some good tools that you can use to make parenting fun.
Okay, so what type of opinions are you seeing when people come to you for help and assistance?
Well, a lot of times parents will say, my child is tantruming all the time, and let's just say, mother-in-law is blaming me, saying that I'm not tough enough on her, I'm not strict enough, I'm always giving in, and that's why she's tantruming all the time. And there's a lot of mom guilt that happens, and this can happen with dads too. And we say, okay, so I say, so first of all, we're going to put that away, because the tantruming is not because you're a bad parent. The tantruming is because of something else going on. So that's when we would start to try and dissect it. And let's talk about, so what are the things that set off the tantrum? What are the things that make your child upset? Does your child have any learning challenges? Because sometimes a child has a learning challenge that we're unaware of. The frustration of perhaps not being able to communicate effectively what they need or want can cause them to melt down and have a tantrum. And sometimes it's things that are just happening in the house. You have a new baby, dad or mom is traveling a lot. There's now a co-parenting arrangement. Maybe there's been a divorce. I try and dissect it with them, whatever, and figure out what is at the root cause of the tantrum. Or maybe they're not feeling well. It's so many different things, but it's never because you're a bad parent. So I think that's the first thing I want parents to know.
I know you work with parents with children between 18 months and about 8 years old. What would you say is the most challenging years for new parents?
I would say it's the 3-year-old years, surprisingly, because everybody thinks it's the terrible twos, and it really isn't. Every year, I have parents come to me of 3-year-olds and say, I don't know what happened. The twos were not terrible. They're okay. But now all of a sudden they're three and they're monsters and they're mean. And I say, just wait till they turn 4. It's all going to go away. What happens, I see with kids when they're 2, they're still very, very dependent on their caregiver. Their language may not be fully developed. So they're still struggling along and they're very, very dependent. And there may be a lot of separation anxiety. And then once they turn 3, they start to get a bigger vocabulary. They start to realize that they are a little human being with opinions and can make choices and have ideas. And they start to press buttons a little bit more and realize that, hey, I can be a little independent. And then just when parents are really beside themselves, the child turns 4 and they start to realize, oh my gosh, like I'm out there a little too much. And they get separation anxiety again, and they want to be with mommy and daddy. And it's like this kind of revolving thing. So I would say I get the most calls from parents of 3-year-olds that need strategies to really navigate through that year, which can be tough behaviorally and just socially and emotionally. It's a tough year.
Okay, yeah, definitely strategies will be helpful. I know I speak with many people who talk about the threes also. They say that they used to say, terrible twos, but it's more like three, they say two, but it could happen as early as two. But I also see parents like they will talk about the teenage year. So it's kind of like the threes are kind of vanish. And I mean, it could be so far off that now that you're going through a new stage, you're like, this is terrible. So like you have teens versus the threes. I'm not sure which one will be worse, but at least with a teen, you can communicate and they're able to reason with you to a degree. And then we get into like, at 3 years, they are still learning. They might not fully understand concepts, emotions yet, and we might have a very old school type of thinking where, as you said early on, where your stepmom or your mother would say, you need to discipline your child more, or something along those lines. Yet some parents don't believe in hitting their kids and saying, this is a punishment. Or some parents don't even believe in time out. So like there's different parenting styles that a parent would choose. What would you say is the most effective type of parent there is right now?
So I think it's being an adaptive parent, being a parent that will adapt your parenting style to the situation and the child. Because not every style will work for every child, and not everything works for every situation. So, for some things, I say you need to be a really authoritative parent. If you have a child that is, say, running across the street and not holding your hand and are doing things that are really unsafe, I say that's the time to be an authoritative parent and say, no, I'm putting my foot down. You're holding my hand when we cross the street. This is not safe. Or, no, you can't. When we're eating dinner, we're not going to be walking around the table, eating and chewing and dancing around because you could choke on your food. Like, that's not, it's a no, it's a hard no. And then I say, in some respects, sometimes you have to be a more permissive parent. So, parents that are maybe going through a divorce and you have a child that's really struggling. And normally you say, no more time on your iPad, or, no more computer time or tech time. Maybe you need to, like, if they're having a hard day and, they're just adjusting to, say, being at mom's now, being at dad's now, maybe give a little bit of leeway, maybe don't be so authoritative because they're going through something and they need a little downtime and a little more leeway than you normally would do. I'm not saying that forever you let them have an hour of tech if it's only supposed to be 30 minutes or 15 minutes, but read your room, I say, and see what's kind of happening. And, I always say choose your battles, because sometimes it's just not worth getting into a tug of war over something that is really not going to affect a child later in life. I was just talking to someone yesterday and I said that I saw a mom walking her son to school in an alligator costume. It was not Halloween and it was really hot out. And I just said, that's a mom that chose her battles, because who cares, He's going to get to school and peer pressure alone will take care of him getting out of the alligator costume. Like, don't worry about that. But he's not going to run across the street without you, because that's a hard no.
Yeah, no, it's very true. The peer pressure, though, aspect, I mean, we can even go into the fact that when they start to go to school, it can even start as young as preschool, they start to learn from each other, where they're like, oh, they're doing this. Some play really nice, some don't play really nice. So you got to teach them how to play, teach them how to be nice, things along those lines. But then bad habits can form also. So they see them maybe spitting, where they're like, oh, they're spitting. So why can't I do it? Where that's going to be a whole conversation that needs to happen. Is there a way to, since we can't like pick the classrooms that our children are going in, is there a way to help the children move through the dynamic of different children growing up, different individuals. It's like, since they can do it, it doesn't mean you can do it, because there's a different mom or dad that says it's okay for them, but I say it's not okay for you. And then it's a whole battle, because in their mind, it's like they're three, I'm three, or I'm four, and they can do it, but I can't. Why is it like that? And I'm sure they're going through a lot of confusion because they're learning from their peers. As you said, with the peer pressure with the alligator outfit, it might seem like, okay, now I'm going to be like everyone else. But when they try to be like someone else and they do what other children are doing, then the parent kind of comes in, or guardian figure, and they say, you're not supposed to do this. So it's a bit confusing for children.
You're right. It is really hard. And I think you have to set out when you first become a parent and kind of decide, what is your value system? What do you value? What behaviors do you tolerate and what behaviors do you not tolerate? What behaviors do you think are the behaviors of a good, kind kid, and what behaviors do you think are not? And I think it's important to constantly just reinforce that with your kids, not only when something is happening in the classroom, but all along. Hopefully, if they encounter that kind of behavior in their classroom, like spitting, they're going to already know that that's not something mom and dad would want me to do, because we've talked about those things. We've talked about being polite and keeping into your own space. I think it's also important that when you choose a preschool, that you voice to the teachers, what you value and what behaviors you don't want your child to do. And to let you know, if my child starts mimicking the bad behaviors of another child, I want to know right away. It's important to nip it in the bud and not let it go. And also find out, how do they deal with behavior? Because I always feel that dealing from behavior from a positive way is better than from a negative way. So I don't think timeout really works. I think if a child gives themselves a timeout, that works. So if there's a child that maybe has ADHD, or they're fidgety, or they're tired, and they know that they can remove themselves and say circle time for a few minutes and go on in the corner and use like a little basket of some toys and calm down, and then come back when they feel ready, that works because they're given control. But putting a child in the corner, it usually has the opposite effect, because most times kids are acting out because they want attention. They don't care if it's good attention or bad attention. If you can catch them being good instead of focusing on the behaviors that you don't like, eventually they're going to learn that, wow, the teacher gives me a lot more attention when I'm following directions, or my parents give me a lot more fun, and there's, things are much better when I'm following the rules of the house. I think that's one way around it for sure.
Yeah. And children don't care if it's positive or negative most of the time, as long as they're getting paid attention to. I remember I
Exactly.
had one student, this is when I first started teaching. I think he was in, I want to say either second or third grade when I had started the year, and he was a handful. His mom was working, single mom, and he was being raised by his grandmother. She was doing the best she could, but he was kind of just running rampant. There was no discipline, no structure for him. And like when he would come into the classroom, I mean, he was under chairs, he was climbing, he was jumping, he was doing unsafe things. And like this is like my first year as teaching. So I was struggling with this one individual child, because I'm like, what do you do with someone who doesn't want to learn or be a part of the classroom? It was just like, I'm a rebel. I don't want to be a part of anything that the class is doing. He was the only one. And he wasn't special ed or anything. He had a discipline problem.
Yeah.
And it was a struggle the first year. The second year was kind of better. And then like the next year, he basically came to me. He goes, I'm a changed man. And I was like, I wish you would have changed, 2 years ago. It would have been a lot easier. But we have different situations for every different child. And one of the things I hear, or I heard when I was a teacher in the teacher's room and stuff like that, is they will label a child bad. This is a
Yes, the
bad
dreaded
child.
teacher's room.
Yeah. Like this guy just evil, he's not going to be anything in life. And even if the teacher doesn't directly say that to that child, I am 100% positive their actions are going to be indicative to that type of mindset they're giving themselves to that child. So they're going to say this, this child's not going to be anything. So they're going to pass them along in grades. They're going to, maybe not give them the attention that they are vying for because it's negative or something. They don't want to deal with it. And they know in their, heart of heart, whatever this child does by the end of the year, they're not my problem. Sometimes teachers give up, and parents also give themselves a mindset. It has changed since the pandemic, is that they would send their kids to school and they would hope that their kids are going to get the best education. But then if you have a, individual, the student is not, like the most upstanding citizen in the classroom, it makes it difficult for the teacher to say, I'm going to give it my all to make sure that your child is getting the best education possible. Even if in the beginning of the year, you talk to them, you say, yeah, everything is going to be good. This is what we're learning. Here's the curriculum. And everything seems good. But then it's kind of like by the end of the year, they're watching more videos than, getting instruction and learning. What can we do to help parents start to take in the role of education also so they can work side by side with the teachers rather than saying school is for learning and education, and when you come home, it's whatever time?
Right. Yeah, I think it's really important that parents form a partnership with their teacher and their school. And it's hard. I mean, like you said, the mom of that one child was a single mom. She was probably working a million hours. The grandma was doing the best that she could, but he probably wasn't getting a lot of one-on-one time when he went home and he was seeking that attention. It's hard to say do this or do that because that's a situation where they're probably struggling to find 5 minutes where they could just get up the energy to make dinner, even perhaps. But I think that if you can ask the school, say, look, I'm struggling, but I do want to have some sort of connection. I do want to do something with my child at home to show there's a homeschool connection. Ask the teacher, what can I do? Can I get a workbook? Can I do, one page a night for 5 minutes? Or just read to your child. You don't have to do formal workbooks or worksheets or homework. Just read together because that's quality learning time. And it's a good time to choose books that maybe focus on issues that you think the child might be struggling with. And then that opens up discussion. And that's good quality time.
That's actually a great recommendation, is to read them books that they might be struggling with something. So if they're struggling with being kind, you get a book that's about being kind. If they're maybe a bully, and I hope that's not the case, but you get a book about bullying and you can see how the kid is sad. So then they can see it. It could be any type of thing. And there's so many wonderful books out there. And I encourage parents to go to like Barnes and Nobles or go to your local library. I just checked my local library the other day because my sister had sent me a picture of her daughter in the library. They had a whole event. It seemed like there was story time, there was play, blocks, and everything. And many parents don't even know that there's so many resources that your town, that your city has to offer you. And just doing a little bit of investigative work, I called them because I went to the website and it was so confusing. And I mean, I'm tech savvy to a degree. And I was like, where in the world am I going to find this kid area? So I called the library, and it was probably a woman who was, I think, like probably in her 50s, it seemed like. And she was like, oh, yeah, it's easy. And I'm like, man, like I'm getting showed up. But the reality is, we have resources that we can utilize that many of us don't even know are there. So when a parent is going through struggling, their kid is not behaving, maybe they're a single child. I know sometimes this happens quite a bit when there's just one child, or if a parent has a long window between children. So like if a children, or so if they have their first child and they're 5 and then they have the next child, it's like that big gap right there has to be learned from that child. Like 5 years, they were, doing their thing, and like mom and dad was giving me all this attention. And now all of a sudden, now it's being split. Versus if the child was maybe 1 or 2 around there, it's like, oh, wait, I'm growing up and I'm sharing the attention. And one of the things that I want to talk to you about is there was an interview with Jordan Peterson. He had talked about this idea and this concept about how we have to do the same things with our children. So if you pick up one kid, you have to pick up the other one so they don't kind of get this in their head, like, oh, you care more about my brother or my sister. And I found that to be interesting, to say the least, because it's like, if you do that, in a sense, you don't teach them adversity because you're not going to get everything. So, for example, if a
Right.
team wins soccer or something, guess what? There's going to be a loser, but they do have teams and stuff like that where there's no points and everyone's a winner. And even that, like, parents don't even like that. Like, I've interviewed many, coaches and parents who say, that's not going to happen in my house. There's no participation trophies, there's no participation ribbons and things along those lines because they don't understand adversity. What is your take on adversity from, working in your window all the way up to 8 years old? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it necessary?
I really think kids only learn, or they learn the most during adverse situations. They learn how to be good sports. They learn how to deal with failure, and they learn how to pick themselves up and brush themselves off and start again and try again. And life, it's not always about, you're not always going to win. Everything's not always going to go your way. You're not always going to have everyone like you. You're not always going to have the best grade in the class. You're not always going to win every game. And I think it's important. It's just as important to, be good at something and be a winner as it is to learn how to be a graceful loser. And I think get great lessons. It's great if they can win some too, because that's a great feeling and you want them to feel good about themselves. But also, how do I act when when I don't win? Good sportsmanship. Good job, everybody. When they shake hands with the soccer teams and they shake hands and they're like, it was a great game. It was still fun. We had a great time. I think that's really important to teach kids. And I don't think participation trophies do anything to help a child unless the participation trophy is for, we had 10 games and we absolutely need every single person to show up for all 10 games or we're disqualified. If it's an award for that attendance, then that's great. If it's for that. But if it's for, you came to 3 games, you didn't play really hard, you didn't give it your all, but you're still going to get a trophy because you paid to go to the dinner, I don't care for that approach.
There's a concept about children in play where they're supposed to get about, I think it's like 2 hours of uninterrupted play per day. And we, as parents, we're busy. And then schools, they have their own curriculum and things along those lines. Recess is what, 24, 25 minutes. And they might get PE once a week, sometimes twice a week, depending on the rotation in the class. You're only getting maybe at most 2 to 3 hours of physical activity in school per week. Now, of course, that's not to say that they're not going to go home and play. Here in Texas, for example, it's very hot. They are going to come home. They're going to say, oh, I had such a rough day at school. Someone said something about me, or I got to do homework. And before you know it, they're so wiped out, mentally drained, that they just want to be in the iPad, watch some cartoons, TV. And we can see the childhood that we grew up in being very different than the childhood that our children are growing up in. And we have to ask ourselves, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? Would you say that children growing up today with technology have, I guess you can say, new world problems that they have to address versus ourselves while we were growing up? Because I remember growing up being out on the streets and going riding my bike, and like my grandmother yelling at me to come inside and eat. And I'm just out, hanging out with my friends, catching fireflies. And I mean, it was a different life. It's a different world, to seem like. But now it's like everything is iPad, technology, TV. There's just so many things that can distract us from going outside. But then if you give them the option to go outside or have an iPad, typically they will go outside, especially if they're younger. But as they grow, they become more dependent on that technology. And it could be because there's a social aspect to it where I need to be connected to my friends. So I need to talk to them on a, like a chat room or something. Like, I'm not sure what they're using today, but they are using it as a tool to, I guess you can say, replace in-person meetings and greetings.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I think kids today are really missing out. I think that they are They are in this immediate gratification kind of world where if they don't get the answer right away, they're upset about it. If they're not constantly stimulated, it's hard for them. Going outside and trying to gather a bunch of people to have a game of kickball like I used to do, like, never happens. I used to go out with a stick, and that was like, what, we're gonna make this stick be something, like, we're gonna have a fake campfire, we're gonna pretend we're fishing, and we're gonna go on an adventure. And I think I feel very sad for our kids now because one, they hide behind these screens that give them that instant gratification, but also there's so much, and not so much with little kids, but as they get into a little bit older and they start, if parents let them get on these Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, they start to feel, especially if they're bullied in school. If you were bullied in school in the 70s, when you went home, you could escape it for a while and regroup and kind of figure out your strategy for how you're going to handle school the next day. Now there's no escape. These kids are bombarded constantly with nasty text messages and terrible posts about them on Instagram and TikTok. And I think it's really sad. And, I wish, I kind of grieve for our children not having the kind of freedom and imaginary play experiences that we had, because I think they were wonderful.
Yeah, we can all buy farms and go live on the farms and have a bunch of kids and have them all grow
Yeah.
up with each other. It would definitely fix a lot of things, but we are living in a world and there's going to be many struggles and challenges that parents are going to have to navigate. And I do want to reiterate that there's always going to be help. There's always going to be someone like yourself, Danielle, who's going to be helping parents go through the process, look at the modern day world that children are growing up in, and then developing strategies that are going to be beneficial for the parent and the child. And that's so important to understand that there's help just around the corner. So as we begin to wrap up, I would love to get some final words from you and then for you to tell the audience where they can find you.
Sure. I think the most important thing is to remember that just because you've had a child, it doesn't mean that the next day you're going to have every answer to parenting, that you're going to be perfect, that you're going to know the answer for everything. I always hear, oh, as soon as you have the baby, you'll know everything. And it's just not true. You don't know everything. And you grow up with your child, you grow up together, you learn together. And it's okay to say, I don't know how to handle this. It's totally okay, because if you've been there, so have a million other parents. That's totally fine. I also say don't Instagram yourself. Don't compare yourself to other perfect families on Instagram, because they're not perfect. They're not showing you the dirt diaper at Disney. They're taking the picture after or before before everyone's like, crying and screaming. And just compare yourself to yourself and to your family and to your values and what's important to you. If you want to find out more about my coaching, you can find me at my website, which is daniellelinder.com, DANIELLE Lindner.com. And you can also get my book, which is Parents Pocket Guide to Surviving the Preschool Years, on Amazon or Barnes and Noble.
All right. And I'll make it easy for everyone. You don't have to worry about the spelling. Just click the link in the description box below. I just find this so much easier. Before they had to keep rewinding as a D. Okay, A. So just click the link. You'll get straight to her website. You'll get her book and you'll just learn what needs to be done. And if you are struggling, just again, you're not alone. We can look at the picture perfect, as you said, the Instagram type of thing where everything is perfect. There's filters and everyone's smiling, but you didn't see the tantrum before. You didn't see the fight. You might not see the gray hairs because they just dyed their hair. So there's going to be an experience that you have to go through as a parent. And I always say that you should cherish it because when they're little babies, you love them and they're cuddly and they're always sleeping. And like, this is pretty easy. And then they start walking. You're like, oh my God, I have to childproof my house. And then you're like, okay, great. Now they're going off to school. And then you can see that they grow up so quickly. And before you know it, they're going to be 18, going off to college. And you're going to look back at those pictures when they're babies and you're going to wish for those moments. So cherish these moments, the good, the bad, everything in between. And you're going to find that if you need help and support, if you're struggling, it's right there. And then later on in life, you're going to say, I made it through, number one, but then number two, I'm glad I did it. So I want to thank you so much, Danielle, for coming on, spending some time and just talking about your work.
Thank you.